I want you to picture a cinematic high stakes scenario for a second.
Okay.
Actually, no. I want you to imagine a sequence of events spanning three entirely different continents.
Right.
And each one of these fundamentally alters the geopolitical landscape in, just a matter of hours.
Hmm.
So let's start in the dense, tropical, urban sprawl of South America. It's midnight. A highly classified stealth extraction is underway.
The kind of stuff you see in movies.
Exactly. Elite operators are slipping into a heavily fortified capital city. They grab a garden world leader and they vanish into the night sky.
We got a single shot fire.
We got a single shot. Now, hold that thought. Shift your mind over to South Asia.
Okay, different environment entirely.
Totally different. The tension along a heavily militarized border there is just palpable. And suddenly, a lightning-fast 23-minute surgical strike tears through the sky.
Wow. 23 minutes.
Yeah, 23 minutes. And a defending nation's radar screens are completely blinded, rendered utterly useless, while precision missiles systematically dismantle their air bases.
Leaving them totally defenseless.
Right. And finally, cut to the Middle East. The night sky is illuminated by a massive coordinated aerial bombardment. Stealth jets, cruise missiles, they're moving with total impunity through what was supposed to be restricted airspace.
And that resulted in the destruction of key military infrastructure.
Yeah, and the confirmed death of a supreme leader.
So we're looking at three massive geopolitical earthquakes.
Huge ones.
Three entirely different theaters of operation. You've got different climates, different combatants, entirely different strategic objectives.
Exactly. And this is why we are doing this deep dive today for you. If you look closely at the after-action reports and the telemetry data we're examining, there is a connection.
Right, there's a thread.
There is a singular architectural failure tying all three of these recent events together. In all three cases, the defending forces, the militaries, whose sole job was to guard those skies, they relied heavily on what were marketed as impenetrable, state-of-the-art Chinese air defense systems.
We are talking about Beijing's absolute top-tier military exports here.
Yeah. And in all three scenarios, these systems didn't just, underperform or miss a few targets.
They collapsed.
They collapsed entirely. So today we're looking at a stack of intelligence reports, defense analyses, satellite imagery assessments, breaking news. To unpack this systemic failure, we are going to figure out how these systems failed on a granular technical level.
Which is fascinating.
It is. We're going to see why it matters to the global balance of power and what this actually means for the future of warfare.
But before we get into the technical anatomy of radar frequencies and missile intercept vectors, I think we really need to establish a very strict baseline for you, the listener.
Yeah, absolutely. That's crucial.
Because the intelligence reports and the battlefield assessments we are examining today, they cover highly politically charged, active, and very recent conflicts.
Extremely recent.
Right. We are looking at data detailing the United States and Israel striking Iran, India's military operations against Pakistan, and the United States covert extraction operation in Venezuela.
A lot of heavy geopolitical baggage there.
Exactly. So I want to make it absolutely clear right at the top. This deep dive is strictly an impartial analysis of the military technology and the tactical facts as they are presented in the source material.
Just the hardware.
Just the hardware. We are going to be examining hardware limitations, software integration flaws, electronic warfare physics. We are not endorsing any nation's foreign policy. We are not taking sides in any of these military actions, and we are certainly not supporting any ideological viewpoints.
Right.
Our focus is purely on the engineering and the lack of performance of these specific air defense networks under extreme real-world combat stress.
That is a vital disclaimer, because looking at this list of targets, it's incredibly easy to get lost in the political theater of it all.
Oh, absolutely.
But if we separate the politics from the hardware, we get a really fascinating look at modern warfare. So let's set the scene with the most recent and arguably the most structurally shocking event in our stack of sources, the absolute collapse of the Iranian defense grid.
Right.
Walk me through the scale of what just happened in Tehran.
Well, what the defense analysts are describing in these reports is a coordinated offensive of staggering scale and complexity. It was executed jointly by the United States and Israel.
And what were the operational names for this?
In the briefing documents, these are referred to as Operations Epic Fury and Roaring Lion.
Epic Fury and Roaring Lion. Okay.
And the geographical footprint of this strike alone is immense. To give you a sense of the sheer volume of airspace involved, the airstrikes successfully hit targets across more than 20 of Iran's 31 provinces.
Wait, 20 out of 31 provinces?
Yes.
That is practically the entire country experiencing simultaneous or near simultaneous aerial incursions. I mean, that's not a surgical strike, that's a continental sweep.
It is a massive operational theater. It encompasses not just the capital of Tehran, but reaching deep into western, central, and southern Iran. And the ripple effects across the region were immediate. They were
Well,
severe.
what kind of ripple effects?
Well, the operational chaos in the airspace was so profound that Dubai International Airport, which sits across the Persian Gulf and is literally one of the busiest global aviation hubs on the planet,
Oh, wow.
yeah, they were forced to temporarily cease operations.
Just shut down completely.
Completely. Commercial aviation simply could not safely navigate the sheer volume of electronic interference, projectiles, and military aircraft operating in that broader regional corridor.
That is why, and the geopolitical shockwaves are just off the charts. I was reading through the post strike assessments, and the sources confirm the death of Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, during these bombardments.
Which is a paradigm shifting event for the entire Middle East. The fallout has been immediate, and it is highly volatile.
I can imagine.
Iran's military apparatus has vowed what they are publicly calling the most ferocious offensive operation in history.
Those are strong words.
Very. They have explicitly threatened to expand the conflict by targeting U.S. allied nations in the region. They specifically named countries like Qatar and the United Arab Emirates.
So they are threatening to drag the whole region into it.
Right. And on the other side of this strategic equation, U.S. President Donald Trump responded by publicly mocking Khamenei's legacy. He labeled him one of the most evil figures in history and stated definitively that U.S. offensive operations will continue as long as necessary to dictate terms of peace.
So the political and strategic stakes could not possibly be higher right now.
They really couldn't.
But beneath all of that intense political rhetoric is the glaring military question that defense analysts are just obsessing over. How did the attacking forces manage to inflict such widespread, unchecked destruction?
Right, because they weren't supposed to be able to do that.
Exactly. Because leading up to this, Iran was supposed to have built a fortress in the sky. If you read the procurement manifest from the last few years, they didn't just have a few anti-aircraft guns pointing up. They had invested billions in building what military planners call a layered defense.
Yes, a layered integrated air defense system, or IADs. That is essentially the gold standard for protecting a nation's sovereign airspace.
So how does that work in practice?
If we want to visualize how this is supposed to work, think of it like the security architecture of a high-tech bank vault.
Okay, a bank vault. I like that.
You don't just rely on a single heavy lock on the front door. You build multiple overlapping redundant tiers of security. If a thief bypasses the perimeter fence, they hit the motion sensors. If they bypass the sensors, they hit the biometric locks, and so on.
Okay, that's a great visualization. So let's unpack these layers for the listener. Let's walk through the Iranian bank vault, starting from the inside out. What is the innermost layer?
At the innermost layer, you have the short-range air defenses, or Escherad. These are the equivalent of the heavily armed guards standing right inside the vault room itself.
The last line of defense.
Exactly. For Iran, this defensive tier included a mix of imported and domestic systems. You have the Russian-designed Tor M2 and the Pantsir S1.
And what do those look like?
Well, to give you a mental image, the Pantsir isn't just a missile tube. It's a massive self-propelled system mounted on an armored truck chassis that combines both rapid-fire anti-aircraft cannons and surface-to-air missiles.
That sounds intense.
It is. And alongside those, Iran deployed their domestic Zulfikar systems and various tactical man-pads.
Man-pads being man-portable air defense systems, the shoulder-fired missiles you see infantry carrying around.
Precisely. This inner layer is designed as the absolute last line of defense. They are tasked with engaging low-flying immediate threats, like a cruise missile or a loitering drone, that have somehow managed to slip past all the long-range radars and medium-range interceptors.
So they are dealing with the threats that are practically knocking on the front door.
Exactly.
So what happens when we step out a layer?
Stepping out to the medium-range layer, which would be the laser tripwires in the bank lobby, following our analogy, Iran relied heavily on domestically produced systems, like the Khordad 15 and the Rod, to fill in the coverage gaps.
And what is their job?
These are designed to push the engagement envelope out to maybe 50 or 75 kilometers. They take down aircraft before they can release their short-range glide bombs.
Okay.
But the real focus, the outermost perimeter designed to detect and destroy threats hundreds of kilometers away before they even cross the national border, is the long-range layer. These are the absolute crown jewels of the defense network.
The thick steel walls of the vault.
Yes. And Iran's long-range layer was supposedly anchored by a triad of heavy hitters.
Let's hear them.
They had the Russian-made S-300 PMU-2, which has been a staple of their defense for years. They had their own domestically engineered system called the Bavar 373, which they actually claim is superior to the Russian S-300.
Bold claim.
Very. And crucially for our discussion today, they had the recently procured Chinese HQ-9B surface-to-air missile system.
Right, and the HQ-9B is really the star of this particular show. Let me pull up the backstory from the intelligence summaries on how Iran even acquired the system, because the timeline is fascinating.
Really is.
Back in June 2025, there was a highly intense 12-day conflict between Iran and Israel. And during that specific window, Iran's Russian-supplied S-300 systems apparently performed terribly.
They really struggled.
Yeah, they failed to effectively deter or intercept Israeli strikes. So the Iranian military high command is panicking. They recognize a massive vulnerability and they need a rapid top-tier upgrade. So they pivot away from Moscow and turn to Beijing.
Right.
Sometime in late 2025 or early 2026, they finalize this massive, complex oil for weapons barter deal to acquire the Chinese HQ-9B.
And there's a really interesting layer of political intrigue surrounding that specific procurement.
Oh.
Yeah, you had Iranian officials such as MP Abul Fazl Zahra from their National Security Committee publicly going to the press and boasting that China was stepping in to supply these advanced systems to close their critical operational gaps.
So they were bragging about it.
They were. But at the exact same time, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Beijing was officially and vehemently denying that any such sale took place.
Classic geopolitical plausible deniability. Sell the weapons, secure the oil, deny the paperwork.
Exactly.
But satellite telemetry and the post-strike debris field clearly confirm the systems were deployed around Tehran. And if you read the manufacturer's brochure, the HQ-9B sounds like the ultimate deterrent.
On paper, it's a beast.
Yeah. The engineering lineage is interesting. It's heavily inspired by a mix of the Russian S-300 PMU and the American Patriot PAT-C systems, basically reverse engineering the best parts of both.
Right, taking the best of both worlds.
But China claims the current B variant is entirely indigenous. The spec sheet boasts that a single battery can track up to 100 targets simultaneously and actively engage 6 to 8 of them at the exact same time.
Which is a massive workload for a single battery.
Huge. But I want to pause on an analyst's note that caught my eye in these reports. The sources actually disagree on the missile's physical capabilities.
Yes.
One defense assessment firmly states the HQ-9B has a maximum engagement range of 260 kilometers. But another, much more highly technical aerospace report caps it at 200 kilometers. Why is there a 60-kilometer discrepancy on a piece of modern hardware?
That discrepancy is incredibly telling, and it highlights a fundamental issue with global arms exports. What you are seeing there is the gap between the marketing brochure and the combat reality.
Okay, explain that.
Well, a 260-kilometer range might be physically possible under perfect laboratory-like conditions. Imagine firing the missile at a massive, non-maneuvering target, like a commercial Boeing 747 flying at high altitude, in a perfectly straight line on a clear day with zero electronic interference in the air.
Just a big, dumb, sitting duck.
Exactly. In that sterile environment, yes, the missile might have the kinetic energy to reach 260 kilometers, but in a dense, chaotic combat environment, you aren't shooting at airliners.
No, you're shooting at fighter.
You're shooting at a stealth fighter, employing aggressive, evasive maneuvers, dropping physical flares and chaff, and utilizing heavy electronic jamming.
Right.
When a missile has to constantly adjust its trajectory to chase a dodging target, it bleeds kinetic energy rapidly. Therefore, the 200-kilometer figure is likely a much more realistic, conservative assessment of its actual usable kill radius.
That makes total sense.
Paper specs almost never match combat reality, especially with systems that prioritize export volume and cost efficiency over rigorous multi-decade combat testing.
So even before the launch sequence begins, the defensive perimeter is smaller than advertised. But a surface-to-air missile is really just a very fast, very explosive spear. It is completely useless without the eyes guiding it.
The radars.
Exactly. And that brings us to the radar complex, paired with the HQ-9B, the Chinese YLC-8B. The intelligence reports refer to this specific radar as the anti-stealth promise.
That's a bold title.
It is. Let's break down the physics of that. How does this radar supposedly defeat a fifth generation stealth jet like an F-35? Because to the layman, stealth simply means invisible to radar.
Right, and that's a common misconception we really need to clarify for you guys listening. Stealth technology does not make an aircraft invisible. It makes it low observable.
Low observable.
Yes. The goal of stealth is to delay detection for as long as possible, ideally until the aircraft has already released its payload and is heading home. Now, to understand how the YLC-8B claims to defeat this, we have to look at the radio frequency spectrum.
Okay, let's get into the physics.
Most modern Western air defense systems, the exact systems that stealth fighters like the F-22 and F-35 are meticulously engineered to evade. They rely on high-frequency X-band or Ku-band radars for fire control and targeting.
And why do they use those specific high-frequency bands?
Because high-frequency waves have very short wavelengths. When those short waves bounce off a target, they provide an incredibly precise, high-fidelity, high-resolution picture.
So they see a lot of detail.
Exactly. You need that millimeter-level precision to guide a missile to a direct kinetic hit at Mach 3. The entire physical shape of a stealth jet, the angle facets, the internal weapons bays, the specific alignment of the wing edges combined with radar-absorbing coatings is specifically engineered to scatter and absorb those short, high-frequency X-band waves away from the radar receiver.
Okay, let me try an analogy here. It's like standing in the dark and shining a highly focused, very bright laser pointer at a mirror. If that mirror is angled away from you, the laser beam bounces off into the woods and you see nothing. The stealth jet is the angled mirror.
That is a brilliant way to visualize the geometry of stealth. But the Chinese YLC-8B radar takes a completely different physical approach. It doesn't use the X-band.
What does it use?
It operates in the low-frequency UHF band. Low-frequency waves have much longer wavelengths. Because the waves are so long, they don't require precise geometric bouncing off flat surfaces.
Okay.
Instead, they tend to physically resonate with the overall macro structure of the aircraft itself, the wingspan, the tail fins, the fuselage length. The careful stealth shaping and radar-absorbent materials that work so flawlessly against a high-frequency laser pointer are physically much less effective against these long, rolling UHF waves.
So instead of a laser pointer, the YLC-8B is essentially turning on a massive low-frequency floodlight.
Exactly.
It might not give you the exact pinpoint millimeter detail required to guide a missile to a direct hit, but it lights up the general sector enough for the radar operator to say, hey, there is definitely a large metallic object flying through Sector 7.
Precisely. It provides early warning. And the published specifications on this YLC-8B are massive.
How massive?
The documentation indicates it has a detection range of up to 700 kilometers for high-altitude ballistic missiles.
700.
Yeah. And for multi-role fighter aircraft, including stealth platforms, it boasts a 350-kilometer detection range.
Wow. If those numbers held true in combat, it means Iranian air defense commanders sitting in Tehran could watch a U.S. or Israeli strike package form up while it was still hundreds of miles away.
It would completely neutralize the attacker's element of surprise.
And to make it even more frustrating for the attackers, the radar is designed for survivability. It features a shoot and scoot capability.
That's vital for modern systems.
Yeah, the massive antenna array is foldable, meaning a trained crew can theoretically shut the system down, fold up the antennas, and drive the entire apparatus to a new hidden location in under 30 minutes.
Which is a critical capability. If your early warning sensors tell you an anti-radiation missile, a missile designed to hone in on radar emissions, is inbound, you kill the power, fold up, and relocate.
It forces the attacking Air Force to constantly hunt for mobile emitting targets. So when you look at the blueprint, integrating this long-range UHF early warning YLC-8B radar with the high-altitude HQ-9B interceptor missiles, it creates what looks like an incredibly dangerous, highly mobile anti-stealth fortress.
On the blueprint.
Right, on the blueprint. But let's look at the combat telemetry. Because if the physics of the UHF radar worked exactly as advertised, and the missiles had a 200-kilometer kill radius, how did stealth F-35s fly over Tehran?
That is the big question.
The post-strike assessments literally state that the attacking coalition operated with near total air dominance. They didn't just sneak in, they owned the sky.
They absolutely did. And the answer lies in the overwhelming multi-domain tactics utilized by the United States and Israel. They didn't just send in a few F-35s and hope the stealth coating held up.
They brought the whole toolbox.
They executed a masterclass in seeding terror to the suppression of enemy air defenses. They brought a synchronized symphony of electronic destruction. They utilized stealth aircraft, yes, but they paired them with massive electronic warfare jamming platforms, physical aerodynamic decoys designed to mimic the radar signatures of larger planes, and localized drone swarms.
So they just flooded the zone.
They oversaturated the Iranian sensors with so much false data and electronic noise that the system buckled under the cognitive load.
Let's get into the granular, specific points of failure because the technical details in these intelligence reports are what we're here for. First, let's talk about the jamming.
Okay.
The reports indicate that the HQ-9B's internal targeting seekers and its primary fire control radar, the Type 305A, essentially went completely blind.
Yes. The telemetry data notes that the Chinese Type 305A radar, which, interestingly enough, is almost an identical architectural copy of an older Russian phased array radar, it struggled immensely.
What kind of jamming were they facing?
The Israeli aircraft were carrying advanced ALQ-322 jamming pods, and the U.S. forces utilized wideband jammers. They hit the Iranian radar receivers with concentrated blasts of electronic noise in the 10 to 40 gigahertz range.
Let's slow down there. What does a 10 to 40 gigahertz blast actually do to a radar receiver in real time?
Okay, to understand that, you have to look at how radar processes information. A radar sends out a pulse of energy and then listens very, very carefully for the incredibly faint echo of its own signal bouncing back off a target.
Right.
It's all about the signal-to-noise ratio. Jamming is the electronic equivalent of an attacker standing right next to the radar-sensitive listening ear with a massive megaphone screaming white noise at maximum volume.
So you just can't hear the echo.
The radar's processing computers simply cannot filter out the real faint echo of the F-35 through the overwhelming deafening static of the jammer. Furthermore, the sources specifically highlight that the Type 305A radar has inherited critical processing flaws from its Russian design lineage.
What kind of flaws?
It suffers from slow target data processing and low refresh rates. So when you combine a sluggish computer processor with a massive localized barrage of electronic noise, the system simply locks up. The screen goes white.
Just a white screen.
It cannot establish a track, and therefore it cannot provide targeting coordinates to the HQ-9B missile.
And because of this electronic blinding, the attacking coalition found massive blind spots in the coverage. The report says stealth F-35s were able to navigate within 50 nautical miles of the HQ-9 batteries, entirely undetected by the fire control radars.
50 nautical mile.
50 nautical miles. For a jet cruising at supersonic speeds, that's practically breathing down the radar operator's neck.
And it wasn't just the high-altitude fifth-generation fighters exploiting the gaps either. The strike packages thoroughly exploited the system's vulnerabilities at the deck.
At that.
Down low, the U.S. and Israel utilized sea-skimming Tomahawk cruise missiles and other precision-guided standoff munitions flying at altitudes as low as 30 meters above the ground.
30 meters, that's roughly 100 feet. That's lower than a standard commercial skyscraper.
It is an incredibly dangerous terrain-hugging altitude.
Yeah.
And this exposes another physical limitation. The HQ-9 system relies heavily on large, fixed or semi-fixed launch positions.
Okay.
Because of the physical curvature of the Earth, a radar sitting on the ground cannot see over the horizon. Furthermore, when looking out over terrain, the radar struggles with ground clutter.
Ground clutter being?
The radar energy bouncing back off trees, hills, buildings, and the ground itself. Trying to pick out the tiny radar cross-section of a cruise missile flying at 30 meters amidst all that ground clutter is incredibly difficult for legacy processors.
Right, because it just looks like part of the landscape.
Exactly. The HQ-9B was fundamentally designed as an area denial weapon against high-altitude fighters and bombers. It fundamentally struggled to track, let alone engage, these fast-moving, low-observable, terrain-hugging weapons.
Wow. I was reading through the post-action timelines from the Tehran strikes, and there's a phrase that keeps popping up regarding their inner layer of defense, the Showarad systems we talked about earlier. Analysts refer to it as the 20-second problem.
The 20-second problem, yes.
What exactly does that mean, and why is 20 seconds such a fatal flaw?
This is perhaps the most glaring systemic engineering flaw exposed in the entire Iranian defense network. We talked about the bank vault analogy, the layered defense. But a layered defense is entirely useless if the different layers cannot communicate with each other instantly.
Right.
It requires a concept called seamless data linking.
Like a relay race. The long-range early warning radar spots the target at 200 kilometers, realizes the target is diving low and fast, and instantly hands the baton the exact targeting telemetry off to the short-range Panzer system guarding the facility so the Panzer can fire the moment the target comes into range.
Exactly. That is the sensor-to-shooter loop. But Iran's command centers were relying on a stitched-together network of Chinese radars, Russian interceptors, and domestic software. They lacked a unified, high-speed data link architecture.
Ah, so they weren't talking to each other properly.
According to the after-action analysis, it took the Iranian command and control network a full 20 seconds to process a track from the long-range sensors and hand off that targeting data to the short-range point defenses.
20 seconds of latency. I mean, if you're listening, just count to 20 in your head right now. In the context of an air battle, it feels like an absolute eternity.
In modern high-intensity warfare, it is an eternity. To put that latency in perspective, defense analysts often benchmark against the U.S. Patriot missile system, which boasts a highly integrated reaction and handoff time of just 6 seconds.
6 seconds versus 20 seconds.
The Iranian network was 14 seconds slower per engagement loop. Now let's do the math on that. When you are defending against a cruise missile traveling at high subsonic speeds, say 500 or 600 miles per hour, 14 seconds means the missile has physically traveled miles closer to its target. By the time the short-range Pantsir system finally receives the data, processes it, swivels its turret, and prepares to fire, the geometry of the engagement has completely changed.
The target's gone.
The target has either flown past its engagement window, or worse, it has already impacted the radar site itself.
It's the equivalent of trying to play a high-speed competitive video game on a 1998 dial-up internet connection while your opponent is playing on a fiber optic 5G network. The lag isn't just annoying, it's fatal.
Fatal lag, that's exactly what it is.
And the result in Tehran was total systematic devastation. The F-35 utilized their advanced sensor fusion to geolocate the emitting Iranian radars first. They then guided precision rampage missiles that successfully obliterated 6 HQ-9 batteries before those batteries could even manage to launch a single defensive interceptor.
It's incredible.
The so-called crown jewels of the defense network were smashed while they were still effectively in their boxes, unable to complete a single kill chain.
It is a textbook execution of a SEAD mission. You blind the enemy's long-range sensors with electronic warfare, you exploit the software latency in their command network, and you physically destroy the launch platforms before they can even react.
Now, if this were just an isolated incident, a skeptic might say, well, the US and Israeli air forces are simply the most technologically advanced on the planet. They have decades of experience integrating stealth and EW. It was just a really bad day for the Iranian operator.
Right, you can make that argument.
But the reason we are doing this deep dive is that this isn't an isolated incident. If we want to understand the systemic rot, the foundational engineering failures of this exported military tech, we have to look back at 2 other massive failures from just the past year.
And this is where the localized failure becomes an undeniable global pattern.
Right. So we just watched a massive software lag and EW vulnerability doom Tehran's airspace. But you might be wondering, was that just user error?
It's a fair question.
To answer that, we have to look at how this exact same family of Chinese radar technology behaved just a few months earlier under a completely different type of combat stress in South Asia. Let's flash back to May 7, 2025. Operation Sindoor.
Okay.
Give us the geopolitical context leading up to this.
Tensions between India and Pakistan are historically high, but they reach a boiling point following the horrific Pahalgam terror attack. In response to that attack, the Indian government authorized a decisive, highly kinetic military response. The Indian Air Force, the IAF, launched a surgical sea aid mission aimed directly at degrading Pakistan's offensive air capabilities.
And this wasn't a long campaign.
No. What makes Operation Sindoor so remarkable to military analysts isn't a prolonged bombing campaign over weeks. It was the sheer speed of it. It was a highly compressed 23-minute window of extreme kinetic action.
23 minutes.
In precisely 23 minutes, the IAF systematically targeted, struck, and crippled 9 separate Pakistani military air bases, including major strategic locations like Chunian, Rafiki, Merid, and Sukkur.
9 bases.
And they managed to orchestrate this entire strike package without ever having their manned fighter jets cross the line of control.
23 minutes to dismantle 9 military bases. The operational tempo and the synchronized speed required for that are just terrifying.
It requires absolute precision.
Let's look at the defensive matchup here. Because if you look at the procurement ledgers, Pakistan's military is essentially a live-fire showcase for Chinese defense exports. The intelligence estimates note that a staggering 82% of Pakistan's military hardware is of Chinese origin.
It is an overwhelming reliance. Pakistan has essentially bet their national security on Chinese engineering.
And what did they have defending these bases?
For the defense of these specific bases, Pakistan had deployed the YLC-8E anti-stealth radar,
Okay, so a variant of the Iranian one.
which is a very close, highly capable cousin to the YLC-8B radar we just discussed failing in Iran. They positioned this radar at the Chunian Air Base, which sits about 70 kilometers south of Lahore, providing early warning for the entire sector. And to physically protect Lahore itself, they had deployed the HQ-9 surface-to-air missile batteries.
So structurally speaking, they're utilizing practically the exact same sensor-to-shooter shield that Iran bought. The long-range UHF radar paired with the HQ-9 interceptors.
Very similar architecture.
And how did that specific architecture fare against the Indian Air Force?
According to the post-action battle damage assessments, it was an absolute humiliation for the defending systems. The Indian Air Force systematically and quite easily dismantled the Chinese-built shield.
Ouch.
Now, the export brochures and the Chinese state media had aggressively boasted about the YLC-8E radar. They claimed it had a 450-kilometer detection range, incredible sensitivity for picking out stealth targets, and, most importantly, highly advanced anti-jamming capabilities achieved through rapid frequency agility.
Let's define frequency agility for a second. That means the radar system rapidly changes the frequency of its pulse to dodge incoming jamming signals, right? Like constantly changing the channel on a walkie-talkie so the static can't find you.
Exactly. It's a standard electronic countermeasure. If you jam frequency A, the radar hops to frequency B in a millisecond.
Sounds smart.
But the reality over the skies of Pakistan was starkly different. India utilized their ELM 2090U green pine radars, which are incredibly powerful sensors in their own right, combined with advanced, growler-like airborne electronic warfare platforms.
And what did they do?
They didn't just jam a single frequency, they completely saturated the spectrum and blinded the Chinese radar. The YLC-8E's anti-jamming frequency agility simply couldn't process or evade the sophistication of the Indian electronic attack.
It just got overwhelmed.
The radar was overwhelmed, confused, and rendered completely useless for early warning or targeting.
And as we learned with Iran, with the eyes blinded, the fists couldn't strike. The HQ-9 batteries sitting in Lahore failed to engage entirely. They were crippled by that same poor system integration, the same sluggish processing speeds, and the same absolute vulnerability to modern electronic warfare.
And while the Pakistani early warning radars were locked up in a state of electronic blindness, India executed their kinetic strikes with devastating precision. They utilized their BrahMos supersonic cruise missiles.
Ah, the BrahMos.
Now, earlier we talked about the U.S. Tomahawks in Iran flying at a very low 30 meters. The BrahMos is a different beast entirely. It is a ramjet-powered supersonic missile. And during Operation Sindoor, these missiles flew at a terminal altitude of just 10 meters.
10 meters. That is 33 feet off the ground at supersonic speeds. You could practically jump and touch it as it goes past. Let's talk about what that looks like on a radar scope, because that seems physically impossible to track.
It is incredibly difficult, bordering on impossible, for a traditional ground-based radar to track an object moving at Mach 2.8 while hugging the terrain that closely. The radar is dealing with the Earth's curvature, massive amounts of ground clutter, and the sheer speed of the target crossing its field of view in seconds.
So the radar just doesn't see it until it's too late.
The BrahMos missiles easily evaded whatever degraded detection capabilities the Pakistani network had left. Furthermore, India didn't just rely on cruise missiles. They employ highly effective loitering munitions, specifically the Harpy and Harap systems.
Loitering munitions. Let's unpack that concept because it's changing the face of modern combat. These are essentially kamikaze drones, right?
Yes, but highly intelligent ones. They are launched into the air, and unlike a missile who has a specific pre-programmed set of coordinates, these drones fly to a general operational area and then just circle or loiter over the battlefield for hours.
He's waiting.
They are equipped with passive anti-radiation sensors. That means they don't emit a radar signal themselves. They just quietly listen for enemy radar emissions.
So they are hunting for the enemy's flashlight.
Precisely. The moment a Pakistani HQ-9 battery operator decided to try and break through the jamming, the moment they turned their fire control radar on to try and see what was happening to their airspace, the Harpy or Harap drone instantly detected that signal.
And then what?
The drone locks onto the precise geolocation of the radar dish and then dive bombs it at high speed, destroying the multi-million-dollar sensor in a highly precise suicide attack.
Yeah.
It is a brilliant, terrifying weapon because it forces the defender into a psychological and tactical nightmare. Do you keep your radars switched off and remain entirely blind while your bases are bombed? Or do you turn them on to fight back, knowing that the very act of turning them on invites an immediate lethal strike from a drone hovering above you?
That is just a brutal tactical dilemma. But wait, there's a bonus detail in the intelligence reports from Operation Sindoor that is just too fascinating to skip over. It wasn't just the ground based air defenses that failed that day. Pakistan, realizing their ground network was collapsing, tried to fight back in the air.
Right. Pakistan attempted to counter the Indian offensive by scrambling their own airborne assets. They initially deployed Wing-Lung 2 unmanned aerial vehicles for reconnaissance and strike, but Indian air defenses quickly intercepted and neutralized those.
Okay.
But the much more significant failure involved their manned fighter jets. Pakistani JF-17 fighters, which, it's vital to note, are co-developed and heavily engineered with China, attempted to engage the Indian strike packages.
And what happened?
During this engagement, a JF-17 fired a Chinese-designed PL-15E air-to-air missile at the Indian forces.
And the PL-15E is not some cheap legacy weapon. In the defense community, this is touted as China's top-of-the-line, active radar-guided, beyond visual range missile. It's supposed to be a serious threat.
It is marketed as a premier threat.
Mm.
But in this engagement, it missed its target entirely. And what happened next was a strategic disaster for both Pakistan and China.
This is the crazy part.
The missile didn't detonate in the air or upon impact with the ground. It fell to the earth and was recovered completely intact by Indian security forces.
Oh man, recovering a completely intact next generation enemy missile, that is the intelligence equivalent of finding the opposing team's entire playbook, complete with the coach's notes, sitting on a park bench before the Super Bowl.
It is an absolute intelligence goldmine. Indian aerospace engineer and software analysts immediately took the PL-15E apart in their labs, and when they reverse engineered it, they discovered severe fundamental engineering flaws.
What did they find?
They found critical inconsistencies in the chemical composition and design of the solid rocket motor, which drastically affected its kinetic range. More importantly, they found significant, deeply embedded errors in the guidance system software logic.
So it wasn't just a lucky dodge by the Indians.
No. The conclusion was that it wasn't a case of the Indian pilot pulling off some miraculous high-G evasive maneuver. The Chinese missile simply failed to function correctly due to shoddy engineering and poor quality control.
Unbelievable. So let's tally this up. Inferior stealth detection, sluggish software updates, data link latency, complete vulnerability to EW, and air-to-air rockets with fundamentally broken guidance logic. The pattern is clearly forming.
A very concerning pattern.
We've seen this architecture fail catastrophically in the Middle East against the US and Israel. We've seen it dismantled in South Asia by India. So let's complete the global triangle and head over to South America. Operation Absolute Resolve, January 2026. Caracas, Venezuela.
This particular operation offers a really valuable different perspective because unlike the massive multi-province bombing campaign in Iran or the supersonic Siad strikes in Pakistan, this was a highly covert, incredibly precise, low visibility extraction.
A completely different type of mission.
Yes. Elite U.S. Delta Force operators executed a midnight raid right into the heart of the fortified presidential residence in the capital of Caracas. They successfully extracted the Venezuelan strongman, Nicolas Maduro, and they accomplished this exfiltration using specialized, stealth-modified MH-60M Black Hawk helicopters.
Right.
And the most astonishing part of the after-action report. They navigated the ingress, executed the extraction, and completed the egress out of the airspace without a single shot being fired by the Venezuelan Air Defense Network.
And based on the procurement data, this should have been a suicide mission, because the intel summaries highlight that over the past decade, Venezuela, funded by oil revenue, had spent over $2 billion with a B, specifically on advanced Chinese air defense gear.
$2 billion.
They had purchased the highly touted JY-27A meter wave anti-stealth radars, and they had bought dozens of HQ-9 and HQ-12 missile batteries. They were supposed to have constructed an impenetrable overlapping sensor net straight over the capital city.
But the reality on the ground was that the net was full of gaping holes long before the U.S. helicopters even spun up their rotors.
What went wrong for them?
The intelligence assessments detail an absolute logistics, maintenance, and supply chain nightmare. According to the data, over 60% of Venezuela's network of 22 advanced Chinese radars were completely offline and non-operational before the raid even began.
Wait, 60% of a multi-billion-dollar network is just offline. Did they just forget to plug them in, or is this an environmental issue?
It comes down to a foundational flaw in Beijing's global export philosophy. They're incredibly proficient at selling the initial hardware on volume and at a discount. But the aftermarket lifecycle support is apparently abysmal.
So no customer service.
Exactly. The reports cite a complete lack of necessary spare parts and absolutely zero on-site technical support or engineering troubleshooting from Beijing. Add to that the harsh environmental factors, rapid corrosion of sensitive electronics from the humid, tropical Venezuelan climate, catastrophic component failures caused by power surges from the notoriously unstable Venezuelan national energy grid,
Oh man, power surges will kill electronics fast.
and a lack of deeply trained local maintenance crews. A modern multi-million-dollar phased array radar system requires constant, meticulous, highly technical maintenance. Without that continuous lifecycle support, those JY27A variants essentially degraded into very expensive, very heavy scrap metal sitting in the jungle.
Okay, that explains the massive logistical failure. But 40% of the network was still online. That is still enough active radar to spot a flight of helicopters flying over the capital. How did the Blackhawks slip past the radars that were actually powered on and scanning?
Once again, we see a masterclass in the application of electronic warfare. The U.S. military didn't just rely on the stealth shaping of the helicopters. They provided overwatch using EA-18G Growler electronic attack aircraft orbiting safely outside the engagement zone.
The Growlers.
Yes, these Growlers were equipped with advanced ALQ-99 tactical jamming pods and the newer next-generation jammer systems. Now, the Chinese JY27A radars are active electronically scanned arrays, or AESA radars. In theory, AESA technology is supposed to be highly resistant to jamming because it can steer multiple beams simultaneously. But the US Growlers easily exploited their specific operational logic.
How exactly do you exploit an ASA radar?
Similar to the software vulnerabilities exposed in Pakistan, it came down to sluggish processing and predictable algorithms. The JY27A attempts to avoid electronic jamming by frequency hopping, constantly and rapidly changing the frequency of its transmitted signal.
Like we talked about earlier.
Yes, but the radar's software logic was simply too slow and too predictable. The sophisticated US jamming pods could analyze the radar's emission pattern, use algorithms to instantly predict exactly what frequency the radar was going to hop to next, and preemptively jam that new frequency before the radar even switched to it.
That is incredible. They were jamming the frequency before the radar even got there.
The Venezuelan radar was constantly suffocated by targeted barrage jamming. The operator's screens were just filled with noise. They couldn't see a single track.
And because the primary search radars were blind, the HQ-9 and HQ-12 interceptor missiles stayed completely mute in their launch tubes. Their specific illuminators, the secondary continuous wave radars that act like a spotlight to guide the missile to the target in the final seconds, couldn't achieve a lock because of the overwhelming electronic noise environment.
Right.
The entire functional remnant of that $2 billion system just sat there, completely paralyzed in the dark, while Delta Force flew right past them, grabbed Maduro, and flew out over the ocean.
It is a staggering systemic failure of an integrated air defense concept. And a failure of that magnitude, protecting a head of state, did not go unnoticed on the geopolitical stage.
No, it did not. And this brings us to a moment of real political theater, a mic drop moment that I found in the sources. Do you remember President Trump's State of the Union address in early 2026?
Yes, very clearly.
He openly and explicitly mocked this exact tactical situation,
Right.
referring specifically to the Caracas extraction raid. He talked about how American adversaries routinely rely on a, quote, major military installation protected by thousands of soldiers and guarded by Russian and Chinese military technologies, unquote.
Right.
And then leaning into the podium, he just smirked and asked the room, how did that go for them?
It was a very pointed, highly calculated piece of strategic rhetoric, delivered precisely as geopolitical tensions with Iran and China were spiking globally. But if you look beyond the political theater of this speech, it underscored a very real, tangible vulnerability that the U.S. military establishment had clearly and confidently identified in both Chinese and Russian export systems.
They knew they had the upper hand.
The Pentagon had immense confidence in their operational planning because they had just empirically proven in the skies over Venezuela and watched India prove over Pakistan that this current generation of Chinese technology fundamentally could not hold up to the rigors of modern electronic warfare.
Which brings us perfectly to the so what portion of our deep dive. We've looked at the technical failures. Now let's examine the global geopolitical implications of all this data. Because China isn't just a minor niche player in the arms market. They're the world's third largest arms exporter, supplying dozens of developing nations.
And that economic footprint is a critical point. China has built a massive, lucrative export industry by offering military systems that, on the glossy brochure, rival the absolute best American and Russian counterparts, but they sell them at a fraction of the cost. They dominate the market by selling on volume to nations that can't afford or aren't politically allowed to buy American Patriot batteries. But what the catastrophic events in Iran, Pakistan, and Venezuela have forcefully demonstrated to the world is the illusion of deterrence.
The illusion of deterrence. That's a heavy phrase. Let's expand on the economics of that for a second. If you are a developing nation, you just spent a massive percentage of your national GDP on these systems to deter your neighbors. And now you realize the shield doesn't work.
Exactly. Deterrence fundamentally only works if your adversary genuinely believes your weapons actually function as advertised. The US Patriot system, the Russian S-400, Israeli systems like the Iron Dome, regardless of their occasional flaws, these systems have been rigorously, brutally stress tested in actual real-world combat scenarios over decades.
They've been through the fire.
When they fail, the data is collected, the flaws are exposed, software is patched, hardware is upgraded, and the systems iterate and improve. It's an evolutionary process forged in combat. Chinese systems, by stark contrast, have largely existed only on pristine parade grounds in Beijing and in carefully controlled, highly scripted testing environments over the Gobi Desert.
And when they finally met the chaotic, unscripted stress of real world combat against tier one adversaries, they shattered. Let's synthesize the data we've covered and outline the core engineering flaws that these intelligence sources have exposed across all three theaters of war, because it seems to boil down to four critical vulnerabilities.
It does. It boils down to four catastrophic, systemic vulnerabilities that plague the current generation of Chinese exports. First, inferior stealth detection.
Right.
Despite all the aggressive marketing hype surrounding UHF radars and meter wave technology supposedly rendering stealth obsolete, the YLC series and JY series radars fundamentally failed to detect, track, or maintain a lock on stealth platforms like the F-35 or low-flying, low-observable cruise missiles in a contested combat environment.
That's one.
Second, sluggish software and processing power. From the 20-second data link handoff delay that doomed the Iranian interlayer, to the mathematically predictable frequency hopping that allowed the Growlers to blind the Venezuelan radars, the software running these systems appears to be a generation behind the hardware.
Yeah.
It simply lacks the processing speed and algorithmic agility required for modern, high-speed warfare.
It's like trying to run a massive modern video editing software suite on a standard desktop computer from 2005. The hardware just freezes up.
That's the perfect analogy. Third, poor system integration. A layered defense is entirely useless if the layers cannot communicate seamlessly and instantly. The architectural failure to effectively and rapidly data link long-range early warning sensors with short-range kinetic vectors fundamentally doomed both the Iranian and Pakistani defensive networks.
And the fourth?
And finally, massive, critical vulnerabilities to modern electronic warfare. Across the board, in every theater we examined, Chinese primary search radars and missile targeting seekers were easily blinded, spoofed, or locked up by advanced Western jamming technology like the ALQ-322 and ALQ-99 pods.
Okay, so if you are the defense minister of Iran or Pakistan or Venezuela, you are looking at your procurement receipts this morning and realizing you bought an incredibly expensive lemon.
That's a tough morning.
Yeah. But reading these reports, this raises a truly chilling strategic question about China itself. If these export systems are failing so spectacularly abroad, what does this mean for China's own domestic defense architecture?
That is the multi-billion-dollar strategic question that is undoubtedly keeping military planners in Beijing awake at night right now. The HQ-9B isn't just an export model shipped off to allies.
They use it too.
The intelligence sources explicitly state that the People's Liberation Army has deployed the HQ-9B domestically in highly sensitive, strategically vital regions. We are talking about the primary air defense rings guarding the capital of Beijing itself, the airspace over Tibet, and the heavily militarized, contested artificial islands in the South China Sea.
Wait, so the exact same anti-aircraft shield protecting the Chinese capital from an attack is the exact same architectural shield that just got vaporized over Tehran in a matter of hours?
That is the direct implication drawn from these battle damage assessments. And the defense reports highlight a highly specific, very dangerous regional vulnerability for China. Let's take the Taiwan Strait, for example, which is arguably the most tense flashpoint on the globe.
Definitely.
The Taiwanese Air Force operates advanced F-16V Block 70 fighters. Now, these aren't just your grandfather's old F-16s, they have been radically upgraded. Crucially, they are equipped with the highly advanced Viper Shield electronic warfare suite and sophisticated APG-83 ASA radars.
So they have the jamming gear.
If US, Israeli, and Indian electronic warfare platforms can easily map, predict, and blind the HQ-9 radar system so effortlessly in the Middle East and South America, it stands to reason that Taiwan's modern EW suites could execute the exact same suppression tactics over the strait.
Meaning, if a kinetic conflict ever broke out over the Taiwan Strait, China's supposedly impenetrable domestic air defense shield might just evaporate under Taiwanese and allied electronic attack. That completely changes the balance of power and the risk calculus in the Pacific.
It fundamentally alters the strategic calculus for an invasion. And there is a fascinating, almost alarming detail buried in the latter half of these sources from the Japanese Ministry of Defense that suggests China's military high command is acutely aware of this massive vulnerability. They might be trying to compensate for it in a very aggressive, very dangerous way.
The drone countermeasure, I saw that in the notes. Tell me about the BZK-005.
Right. Recently, Japanese maritime and aerial surveillance spotted a new, heavily modified variant of a Chinese reconnaissance drone, known as the BZK-005, flying provocative routes near Taiwanese airspace. What made this specific drone unique and what triggered the intelligence alerts is that it was equipped with a massive, unusual array of heavy antennas mounted under its nose and an unknown, bulky pod attached to its belly.
What are those specific antennas designed to do? Because you don't strap heavy antennas to a reconnaissance drone unless you have to.
Defense experts and signals intelligence analysts assess that the People's Liberation Army has recognized the vulnerability of their ground radars and has significantly bolstered its airborne electronic warfare capabilities on these drones. Based on the antenna configuration, they are likely equipped for high-powered microwave reconnaissance jamming or even directed electromagnetic weapons.
So if China realizes their massive ground-based radars are essentially sitting ducks that can be easily jammed by Western pods, they are taking the jamming war to the sky.
Exactly. If their passive defensive shield is structurally failing, they may be pivoting their doctrine to rely on offensive electronic swarms. In fact, U.S. military wargaming has actually warned that in the initial stages of a potential conflict in the Pacific, China might not rely on shooting down planes. Instead, they might launch a massive coordinated swarm of these small EW-equipped drones to fly directly into adversary airspace and completely disrupt, jam, and fry all radio communications, radar systems, and chain of command networks.
It's a race to the bottom of the electromagnetic spectrum. It doesn't matter who has the faster missile. Whoever blinds the other guy's computers first wins the war.
It's a tacit operational admission from Beijing that traditional ground-based passive defense networks might no longer be viable against Tier 1 adversaries.
Okay, let's take a breath and recap this incredible global journey we've been on today. We started in the dead of night in Caracas, watching elite U.S. Delta Force operators extract a dictator without firing a single shot simply because Venezuela's multi-billion-dollar Chinese-built radar net was completely blinded by predictable algorithmic electronic warfare.
Right.
We then flew to South Asia, where we watched the Indian Air Force systematically dismantle Pakistan's Chinese-supplied air defense grid in just 23 minutes, using terrain-hugging supersonic missiles and patient radar-hunting kamikaze drones.
Completely dismantled it.
And finally, we witnessed the devastating, paradigm-shifting climax in the Middle East, where an impenetrable layered defense over Tehran completely collapsed, resulting in the death of a supreme leader because the crown jewel HQ-9B batteries and YLC-8B radars were overwhelmed by stealth F-35s and a fatal 20-second software lag in their command chain.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. The common denominator, the undeniable engineering thread running through all of this, is the catastrophic systemic failure of Chinese military tech when faced with advanced Western electronic warfare, sensor fusion, and stealth capabilities.
It is a stark, mathematically proven reminder of the vast difference between the perception of military power and the reality of military capability.
And bringing it back to you, the listener, we so often see these grand, highly choreographed military parades on the evening news. We see the massive, perfectly painted missile tubes rolling past the reviewing stands in Beijing or Tehran. We read the terrifying manufacturer spec sheets boasting about 700-kilometer detection ranges and the ability to track 100 targets simultaneously. It all sounds completely invincible.
It does.
But real world stress tests, the chaotic, messy, topologically unforgiving, physics bound reality of actual combat, reveal the truth beneath the paint. Paper tigers burn very, very easily when the heat of modern multi domain warfare is actually turned on.
They do. And that sudden, violent reality shift leads us to a profound and frankly quite unsettling strategic question to leave you with today.
Let's hear it.
If nations like Iran, Pakistan, and Venezuela are waking up today, looking at the satellite imagery and realizing their multi-billion-dollar Chinese defensive shields are essentially made of glass, where do they turn next for national security?
That's the big
The
question.
illusion of safety, the deterrence they thought they bought, has simply vanished overnight. Does this terrifying sudden vulnerability trigger a desperate global rush for nuclear proliferation, with these nations viewing a nuclear payload as the only remaining ultimate deterrent against a technologically superior foe?
Which is a terrifying thought.
Or does it spark a totally new, unseen, and highly unstable arms race, one focused entirely on artificial intelligence, autonomous drone swarms, and offensive electronic warfare that bypasses traditional missiles and radar altogether? Think about how rapidly the global geopolitical map shifts and how inherently dangerous the world becomes when entire nations suddenly realize their skies are completely undeniably open.